Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and we're starting a new series today here called Sustaining Collection. Now we're working with Legolas and Amber here today. You've all been watching them develop. This horse is just getting to the point now where he can sustain collection in all three gaits. Now we've done a little warm-up in the walk with him. It's a pretty hot day, so I didn't want to work too hard, so we had a nice stretch in the walk, and now we're picking up his workout for the day here at a stretch in the trot. But you can also see, and once again, imagine, this is a very big horse, folks, close to 18 hands, if not over it. He has a huge springing trot, as you can see, and how beautifully over his back is. Look how completely developed that top line neck is. Remember, he was also a horse that was a little broken over in the third vertebrae, so we took quite a while to heal that with him again. So now he's doing a lengthening the stride here. Now, it's always a good idea in your warm-ups to preserve that idea of the horse swinging through. I always want to do lengthenings of stride, not just medium and extended trots. So it's a very good idea in your warm-up to just do some very nice big swinging open lengthenings of stride where the horse lengthens the entire frame, which is much easier to do for the horse, which is of course why we do that in the beginning and first level, for instance, as the horse is just beginning this. But in the later work out of collection, the difference is that a medium and extended trot, the horse maintains that upwards appearance and keeps the balance more on its hind end instead of letting itself come forward onto its forehand a little bit as we do here in just a lengthening of stride. But even there you can see how clearly this horse is tracking up underneath the middle of its body. It's tracking very nicely up into the tracks of its front feet and completely even. Now some of you may remember this was a horse that we also had trouble in the beginning. He was a little irregular on one side. You can see that all has disappeared with his strengthening. Look at a beautiful top line. And as we say, so the people who say that horses won't develop from a stretch, that you won't develop unless you pull their necks up and in, this is the answer to that here. So watch as he comes up into the working trot and watch how we don't lose any of that spring. We simply gain a little more spring and he lifts up. So this will be the first time we asked him to come up first to the working trot and then to add a little more collection. And you notice how she just simply stretches up when the horse is ready and restrains with her back a little bit. Almost like a wave coming to the shore, only the beauty of with a horse, the wave doesn't end. So look how much compression he still has in his hocks back there. Now, if you contrast this with so many horses that you'll see in the show ring today, you'll notice how they have almost no flexion in the hocks behind, and they certainly don't swing through with the diagonal pairs in the medium and extended trots. But look how beautifully this horse is staying up in front. Notice how also he's staying up and flexed through the pole and how easy and relaxed this all looks. So we do another little lengthening of stride here, coming out of that little bit more collected work, that we're still not where we're headed yet. This is still all just part of the warm-up. So I would put this trot as that being a little bit more than just a working trot. It's beginning to come up just almost automatically now. And when the horse is strong enough, that's exactly what happens. You don't have to fight a horse into collection. In fact, I would say that it's impossible to fight a horse into collection. But notice how beautifully he just comes right up and lifts, the whole forehand lifts off the ground. Now that can only happen if the thrust, that is the push off the ground, can come upwards into a rounded back. That's what lifts the front end off the ground. Once again, the reason we see so many of these so-called upper-level dressage horses today whose hips are way higher than the withers. These are horses that have been pushing up into a hollow back, which of course is going to destroy all the horse's joints in its legs, which is once again why we see all these horses going lame at such an early age. Legolas here, as an example, has been in training now, for over 3 years and has barely had a day off other than a little stiffness here and there. Look how beautifully he comes forward out of that corner. So now we're doing a little more of a medium trot here, so that you can see how he stayed up in the frame there that time and swung through behind. Once again, the hind leg extended as much as the front leg did. And in that particular case, instead of letting the horse come forward onto his forehand a little bit, as in a lengthening of stride we must do, because in a lengthening of stride we lengthen the whole frame, you see how this time the horse is able to stay up. So now this horse is able to sustain collection in all three gaits. Now notice how beautiful he makes that turn, and you can almost see the compression in the hocks there as he makes that turn and lifts up through his forehand. And when you ride collection like this, look how beautifully round. It just looks like a big rolling ball coming over the ground, how effortlessly he's doing this and completely relaxed. Now notice she is riding in a double bridle, but notice that the curb rein is completely relaxed at all times. It's just there for a little finesse when he needs it. He came with a couple of problems, this horse, one of which was bolting every time you asked him to canter. So it was kind of necessary to put him a little bit in a double bridle and school him just just so you didn't have to go through the thing of him grabbing the snaffle and taking off with it. In other words, he needed a little better education. And he still is prone to do that every now and then. So it's just there. Once again, you'll notice is that there is never any backwards tension on the curved brain as she does this work. Notice how beautifully he's lifting up in front now, and notice the compression of the hind legs has not changed as he's brought her up. Now he's coming up into a little higher level of collection, and we notice the forehand lifts higher off the ground. That's what real collection is. It's not just the horse snapping its legs or hocks up in the air, as we see so many horses doing today. That's what totally destroys horses. And you all have to remember, when it comes to this work, everybody today has these same words that you hear me talk about. Engagement, about over the back. These are the catchwords, being round. These are the catchwords everybody has today. But look at their horses, folks. If they don't look like this as they come up into the upper levels, they're not over their backs. If they have a hollow back, there's no way they're collected. Now look how beautifully this medium trot comes right out from the back. Now that was really a wonderful one there. I would have given that an 8 or 9 had it been in a show ring. That was absolutely a lovely medium trot with no change of balance whatsoever. And notice how as she stretches up at the end of that, he just stretches right back up. And what we have lost in forward motion, you can clearly see how here we have gained in lift instead of just slowing a horse down and pulling into a shortened frame. Now here he goes into a shoulder in, and you notice he does shorten here a little bit. As she gets into bend a little more towards the end, he starts to compress the inside hind leg just a little more, and that also helps the collection. That's where it all begins. How beautifully he stays up through the back here. Now she's going to do a little half pass with him here. Now with him, he had a lot of trouble being his size to do the half passes. So we do the half passes on a pretty wide angle still. Remember, we always want these exercises to go 50% to the front and 50% to the side. So it's always better to have a little wider angle in your half passes in the beginning so the horse can clearly step under the body. What you'll see is these horses that are hollow in the back, they go to do a half pass and they can't get their outside leg around the inside leg because the hind legs are so far out behind. Now there he got a little bit flat, and that one wasn't quite as good as the last one. So she's going to come back and give him a little pluck upwards here at the end. And she's coming back to the next half pass. And again, once again, notice how she lost almost no loss of rhythm as she went into that half pass, but she has a nice wide angle. The shoulder is leading, as it always should, slightly. You can beautifully see the ball. So now we come back. So that was enough. So that was we sustained collection for quite a while there. Remember, even an entire Grand Prix test is not all that long. So that's what we're working up to, and understanding that collection is not just a trick, it's a state of physical developing. So we recently saw a video of someone, and they're literally saying the same words that we're saying here, and however, when they took the saddle off of their horse, you could see that the horse was clearly swayed back, and this was supposed to be an example of their training and what they called engagement would do for the horse. So if that's what you call engagement and it ends up as a hollow-backed horse, how could that possibly be right? Ask yourselves that as you look at some of these upper-level horses. Look how beautifully he came back up into collection here effortlessly. And notice how the neck just comes up. So once again, you can see here, when the horse is ready to come up like this, they just come up with no resistance. It happens all by itself with you just doing the work to develop them to this stage. When you work out of a round back, this is just the natural result of what you do, rather than something that you have to trick the horse into doing or fighting. So now we're going to go to the work in canter, and now he's just begun to do a lot more work in the canter. We've begun to stabilize it. Remember, we didn't canter this horse almost for about 2 years because he just simply, he bolted every time you tried to ask him to canter. But his canter was just so huge and he had so little control over his body that really all he could do was run out of balance. But now look at his canter. So we've really just begun in earnest in the last few months to actually begin to school this horse in the canter, other than just a few circles here and there kind of to see where it is. But look how clearly his forehand stays up. Now we go through the same series of exercises. Here he does a leg yield. Notice how beautifully he steps over. The shoulder stayed leading throughout all of that. You know, when you see lateral work, it should never look like the horse is falling over to the side. I see numerous upper level horses who don't bend, and you see them doing the half pass, and it literally looks like they're falling over sideways. It should never lose that centeredness underneath you. So here we come back to the stretch in the canter. And how beautifully he's able to do this now. Now notice there was no change in the canter other than his neck came out longer and began to swing more actively. So you'll never get a really great canter out of any horse until you're able to do that. You can see how the hind leg is just literally, as it touches the ground, it pushes up into that round back and brings the forehand back up. As I said, in real collection, the forehand is being constantly buoyed up into the air by the thrust of the hind legs. So it's not this seesawing thing that I've heard people recently talk about, that your horse should feel like, like a rocking horse rocking back and forth. It shouldn't feel like that at all in the canter. It should feel like it comes up if you see this horse. And yes, there's a bit of an up and down motion as the horse completes its stride, but it continues to refresh the frame up the hill with each step. Notice how that's a good example to watch that coming down that long side in the shoulder in. So for him, that was a really good canter. We can see how that's really coming clearly. And now we come back to an extended trot for the first time. Now notice the thrust coming through in this horse. Notice the back leg, how it's swinging deep under the body. Now, he's still falling a little bit on his forehand in those, so he'll still have a way to go. If I were talking about his level of collection now, I would put his sustained collection at about a level of a 2 or 3 of what it ultimately be. So you'll only imagine as this horse is just beginning in collection, the kind of thrust he's going to be capable of in the next couple of years. And of course, the beauty of training like this is that you have a horse sound long enough to get it to this stage. That's what I'm seeing with so many people today in all of the horse sports, is they're spending more time with veterinarians. Their horses are never really getting the opportunity because they're breaking down before they even begin to develop. So notice we come right back to that stretch in the trot, break them up. As I said, just like a human being, you can't just keep working the same muscles over and over again. They get exhausted. We simply have to let them back down. That lets the blood flow back into the muscles. And notice how beautifully this horse just keeps floating over the ground with very, very little effort. Now, there was a time when Amber had to work very hard to keep this horse moving. He's a very big horse, and he went often from being very lazy to being, he'd run away with you, so to speak. So kind of one or the other extreme. Now he's getting to this really lovely place where he comes out and gets into the work. And this horse really seems to now at that point where he just seems to love what he does. He comes out, and you notice that there's never a flick of the tail or an angry moment. He just comes up into the frame and just gets into that place that's mesmerizing to watch. Once again, that's real dressage becomes mesmerizing to watch, and it's like ballet. It's not something you don't want to start yelling and screaming and cheering for. You want to let yourself have the experience of observing it as you would a beautiful ballet or a piece of music or whatever the case may be. So you can see how nicely here, once again, he comes back up. Not quite as collected as he was before. He's getting a little tired now. There he begins to compress a little more. There you can see the hind legs compress and the forehand begin to lift off the ground right there. She brings him back all the way back up into collection again. And then down to a nice walk, and we give him a moment to break. So very happy with him. This horse is coming along really beautifully. As you can all see, he's now capable of sustaining collection in all 3 gaits at, once again, what I would call a level 2 or 3, let's say. In the next couple of months, I think by this fall, you're going to see this horse coming into, himself really and being able to sustain all 3 gaits in the upper level movements and be ready to move on into the more difficult movements of piaffe and passage. But you can just imagine how a real passage, once you see a trot the way it truly should work over this, all the passages is just a gradual slowing of that, so you never lose this sense of the wave, as opposed to the horses we see today who drop their backs all the time. In other words, they're pulling their legs up rather than springing off the ground. You could see with this horse as he went how easy and springy he was off the ground, even in the stretch. So I hope that helps. We'll look forward to seeing the next one in a couple of months.